The twin moons of Valdris cast their silver light across the mining colony's metal corridors, but Kira pressed herself deeper into the shadows. Her pale blue skin, almost translucent in the darkness, trembled as she pulled her tattered cloak tighter around her thin frame. The abandoned maintenance tunnels had become her world, a maze of pipes and forgotten machinery where moonlight could not reach. 3 cycles had passed since she'd last seen another living being. The colony's residents moved freely under the twin moons' glow, their thick-skinned physiology immune to what would kill her within minutes. Kira belonged to the Noxari, a species cursed with skin that absorbed moonlight like poison, burning from within until nothing remained but ash. The distant hum of generators provided her only comfort. Down here, surrounded by human-built infrastructure, she felt almost safe. The humans had constructed this place with such precision, such attention to detail. Every pipe sealed perfectly, every joint welded with care. Their engineering marveled. So different from the organic architectures of other species. A clang echoed through the tunnel system. Kira froze, her large violet eyes scanning the darkness. Footsteps, heavy boots on metal grating. Someone was coming. She scrambled deeper into the shadows, but her weakened legs betrayed her. Days without proper food had left her barely able to move. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the beam of a portable light that swept back and forth across the tunnel walls. "Power Junction 15 should be right around here," a voice muttered. Male with the rough accent of the outer colonies. Human. The light beam found her. Kira threw up her hands to shield her face, expecting the worst. Humans were known to be unpredictable, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel. But this one stopped, his light lowering slightly. "Hey there," he said softly. "You okay?" She couldn't speak. Terror had locked her throat. The human stepped closer, and she could see him more clearly. Broad shoulders, dark hair, kind eyes that held no malice. His work uniform bore the name Tom across the chest pocket. "You're hurt," he observed, noticing the dark stains on her. Cloak where moonlight burns had eaten through the fabric and into her flesh. "And you're hiding from something." Kira found her voice barely a whisper. "The moons." Tom's expression shifted to confusion, then understanding. "You can't be in moonlight." It wasn't a question. Somehow he grasped the situation immediately. She nodded, expecting him to back away to report her presence to the authorities. Instead, Tom knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. The simple gesture spoke of a respect she hadn't experienced in years. "How long have you been down here?" "Many cycles," she managed. "I won't harm anyone, I just need darkness." Tom studied her with those thoughtful eyes. There was something uniquely human in his expression, a mixture of curiosity, compassion, and determination that other species rarely displayed. Where most beings would see only a problem to be removed, Tom seemed to see a puzzle to be solved. "The power fluctuations," he said suddenly. "You've been tapping into our grid." Shame flooded through her. "I'm sorry. I needed warmth. I can barely move anymore." Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Sarge's Tales Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Instead of anger, Tom's face showed something entirely unexpected: admiration. "That's actually pretty clever. You managed to splice into our system without triggering any alarms. Most trained engineers couldn't do that." "My people were once builders," Kira said quietly, "before the exile." What happened? The question hung in the air between them. Kira had never told anyone the full story, but something about this human's presence made her want to share. Perhaps it was the way he listened without judgment, or how he had instinctively lowered his voice to avoid startling her. "We were struck by a plague," she began. "Not a disease of the body, but of our very essence. The moonlight that once nourished us became poison. Those who survived were cast out, left to wander the dark places of the galaxy." Tom nodded slowly, processing this information with the methodical thinking that seemed characteristic of his species. "And you ended up here." "I was seeking passage to the outer rim," somewhere with no moons at all, but I ran out of credits, and the next transport won't arrive for many cycles. The human stood, pacing slightly as he worked through the problem. Kira watched him with growing fascination. She had heard stories of human ingenuity, their ability to find solutions where others saw only impossibilities. Now she was witnessing it firsthand. "You can't stay down here much longer," Tom said finally. "The twin moons are moving into alignment next cycle. Their combined light will be so intense, it'll penetrate even these tunnels." Kira's blood turned to ice. She had been so focused on day-to-day survival that she hadn't tracked the lunar cycles. The alignment happened only once every few years, creating a phenomenon the locals called moonlight storm. Even deep underground, she wouldn't be safe. "I have to leave," she whispered, knowing it was impossible. She lacked the strength to travel, the credits to buy passage, and the time to wait for the next transport. But Tom was shaking his head, that determined look growing stronger. "No," he said with quiet conviction. "We're going to figure this out." Tom returned the next evening with supplies hidden in his maintenance kit. As the colony's chief engineer, he had access to areas others couldn't reach, and his late-night repair schedules provided perfect cover. He found Kira in the same spot, curled around a heating vent like a wounded animal seeking warmth. "I brought food," he said, setting down packages of nutrient bars and water pouches. "And these." He produced several thermal blankets, military grade, and designed to retain heat without requiring power. Kira accepted the items with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" Tom settled beside her on the cold metal floor, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I'm curious about your people's engineering techniques." As Kira ate, Tom shared what he'd learned from the colony's database. The Noxari had once been renowned throughout the galaxy for their architectural achievements. Their cities were living things, grown rather than built, with walls that breathed and towers that swayed like trees. But something had gone wrong, a genetic mutation that spread through their population like wildfire, turning their greatest gift into their greatest curse. "The moonlight doesn't just burn us," Kira explained between bites. "It reacts with something in our cellular structure, creating a chain reaction. The pain is unbearable, but death can take hours." Tom listened with the focused attention that had made him the colony's youngest head engineer. His mind was already working, processing the information through the lens of human scientific understanding. "Your people's cities," he said. "They were biological constructs?" Kira nodded. "Everything was alive. Our buildings could repair themselves, adapt to changing conditions, even defend against attacks. We were the greatest architects in the galaxy." "What changed?" "Progress," she said bitterly. "We pushed our abilities too far, tried to merge with the moonlight itself. The experiment was supposed to make us immortal, but instead it made us vulnerable. Those who survived the initial exposure found that any moonlight now triggered the same reaction." Tom was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind working through the implications. "So you're not actually allergic to moonlight. You're having a continuous chemical reaction." "I don't understand the difference. An allergy is an immune response, but what you're describing sounds more like your cells are trying to complete a process they were altered to begin. Like a machine stuck in an infinite loop." Kira stared at him. No one had ever described her condition in those terms before. "You think like a machine," Tom laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the tunnel. "That's what my ex-wife used to say. But thinking like a machine has its advantages. Machines can be repaired." Over the following nights, Tom established a routine. He would complete his official duties during the day, then return to the tunnels after the colony settled into its night cycle. He brought Kira food, medical supplies, and most importantly, conversation. She told him about her homeworld, about cities that sang in harmony with the wind and bridges that grew stronger under stress. He shared stories of human engineering, of structures built to last millennia, and machines that could function in the vacuum of space. "Humans build for permanence," she observed. "My people built for harmony. Perhaps that's why we failed." "Or perhaps that's why you'll succeed once you find balance," Tom replied. "Humans had to learn the hard way that brute force isn't always the answer. Sometimes the most elegant solution is also the most durable. As they spoke, Tom began to understand the depth of Kira's loss. She wasn't just an exile. She was the last living repository of her people's architectural knowledge. The other survivors had scattered across the galaxy, most dying in the dark corners of space where moonlight couldn't reach them. "I dream of building again," she admitted during one of their conversations. "Not the living cities of my ancestors, but something new, something that could exist in darkness or light." "That's not impossible," Tom said thoughtfully. "Human architecture has evolved to work in hostile environments, underwater cities, orbital habitats, even structures that exist partially in subspace. If you combined your people's organic principles with human engineering, the idea hung between them, tantalizing and impossible." Kira was dying slowly, her body consuming itself in the absence of proper nutrition and medical care. The twin moons were approaching alignment, and soon even the deepest tunnels wouldn't be safe. But for the first time in years, she felt something other than despair. In this human engineer, she had found not just a friend, but a kindred spirit, who understood the joy of creation. "Tom," she said quietly, "when the alignment comes, will you stay with me? I don't want to die alone." He looked at her with those steady, determined eyes. "You're not going to die. I promise you that." "You can't promise such things." "Watch me," he said with the quiet confidence that had gotten him through engineering school, through his divorce, through the loneliness of life in the outer colonies. "Humans don't give up easily, and I'm not giving up on you." The alignment was 3 days away when Kira's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. Tom found her collapsed near the heating vent, her skin mottled with dark patches where the moonlight poisoning had begun to manifest even in the deep tunnels. The twin moons' approaching conjunction was already affecting the ambient radiation levels throughout the colony. "It's starting," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Even here I can feel it." Tom knelt beside her, his engineer's training taking over as he assessed the situation. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse erratic. Whatever was happening to her was accelerating beyond anything they had prepared for. "We need to get you deeper," he said, but Kira shook her head weakly. "There is no deeper. The moonlight penetrates everything now. It's in the very air." She gripped his hand with surprising strength. "You should go. Don't let them find you here when they discover my body." But Tom was already moving, his mind racing through possibilities. He had spent the last weeks researching everything he could find about lunar radiation, electromagnetic frequencies, and the properties of light itself. Humans had been manipulating these forces for centuries, creating everything from simple UV filters to complex radiation shields. "I have an idea," he said, pulling out his communicator. "But I need to access the colony's fabrication lab." "Tom, no. If they catch you, they won't." He was already composing authorization codes in his head, legitimate-sounding work orders that would get him access to the equipment he needed. "Humans have been protecting themselves from hostile radiation since we first left Earth. Solar storms, cosmic rays, gamma bursts. We've developed countermeasures for all of it." Kira watched him with growing amazement. Even faced with an impossible situation, he was thinking, planning, refusing to accept defeat. It was such a human response, to treat the universe's hostility as merely another engineering challenge. "What other species calls their star Sol?" she murmured. "What?" "Nothing. Just thinking about human names for things. You call your star Sol as if it belongs to you." Tom paused in his preparations. "Doesn't it? I mean, not literally, but we've been living with it our whole evolutionary history. We've learned to harness its power, protect ourselves from its radiation, even predict its behavior across millions of years. Maybe ownership isn't about legal claims. Maybe it's about understanding something completely." The profound simplicity of the statement struck Kira like a physical blow. Humans didn't just adapt to their environment, they claimed it, mastered it, made it serve their purposes. No wonder they had spread across the galaxy so quickly. Tom left her with enough supplies for several hours and strict instructions to stay near the heating vent. The thermal signature would help mask her presence if anyone happened to scan the tunnels. He moved through the colony's corridors with practiced ease, his authorization codes opening doors that would have remained sealed to most residents. The fabrication lab hummed with quiet efficiency. Tom activated the molecular assembler and began inputting specifications for a material that had never been created before, a composite that could absorb and redirect specific wavelengths of light while remaining transparent to others. The process would take hours, time they didn't have, but human manufacturing techniques had always prioritized speed alongside precision. While the assembler worked, Tom accessed the colony's astronomical database. The twin moons' alignment was more complex than he had initially understood. As they moved into perfect synchronization, their combined gravitational effects would create focused beams of reflected solar radiation, concentrating moonlight into streams intense enough to penetrate several meters of solid rock. But there was a pattern to it. The beams would pulse in predictable intervals, following the moon's orbital resonance. If he could create a material that responded to those specific frequencies, he might be able to build something that would neutralize the radiation before it could reach Kira. The idea was audacious, even by human standards. He was essentially trying to create a selective filter that could distinguish between harmful moonlight and beneficial darkness. It required an understanding of quantum mechanics, material science, and xenobiology that pushed the limits of current human knowledge. But Tom had grown up on stories of human achievement, of impossible problems solved through ingenuity and determination. His great-grandfather had helped design the first Mars habitats. His grandmother had been part of the team that developed faster-than-light communication. Innovation was in his blood. The fabricator chimed softly, indicating the first batch of material was complete. Tom held up a sheet of what looked like ordinary transparent plastic, but he knew it contained molecular structures that could dance between states of matter in response to specific light frequencies. He had enough material to create a small shelter, something that could protect Kira for a few hours at most. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. Human engineering had always been about iterative improvement. Build something that works, then make it better. As he gathered his materials, Tom felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with solving a complex problem. This was what humans did best. Not just survive in hostile environments, but thrive in them. They took the universe's attempts to kill them and turned them into opportunities for growth. Racing back through the tunnels, Tom found Kira barely conscious, her breathing even more labored than before. The alignment was accelerating faster than predicted, the twin moons' gravitational dance creating resonance effects that amplified their combined radiation output. "I've got it," he said, beginning to unfold the transparent material. "It's not perfect, but it should buy us time." Kira watched through half-closed eyes as Tom worked with desperate efficiency, creating a small enclosed space around the heating vent. The material seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it were somehow alive. "How?" she whispered. "Human engineering," Tom replied, his hands never stopping their careful work. "We've been fighting hostile radiation for centuries. This is just another challenge to overcome." As he sealed the final edge of their makeshift shelter, the first pulse of concentrated moonlight struck the colony above them. Even through meters of rock and metal, they could feel its intensity. But inside Tom's creation, Kira's breathing began to steady. For the first time in days, she was safe. The shelter held for 18 hours before the first hairline crack appeared in the protective material. Tom watched with growing alarm as the concentrated moonlight found the weak point, sending a thin beam of deadly radiation into their refuge. Kira screamed as the light touched her shoulder, her flesh immediately beginning to bubble and burn. "We have to move," Tom said, throwing one of the thermal blankets over the crack to block the beam. The shelter's failing faster than expected. Kira was barely conscious, her body racked with spasms as the moonlight poisoning spread through her system. The brief exposure had been enough to trigger a cascade reaction, her cells beginning to consume themselves in their confused attempt to process the toxic radiation. Tom gathered her in his arms, surprised by how light she had become. Weeks of hiding in the tunnels had wasted her frame to almost nothing. He could feel her bones through her skin, fragile as bird wings. "There's a maintenance shaft 50 meters deeper," he said, more to himself than to her. "Old mining equipment down there, heavy shielding." The journey through the tunnels became a nightmare of careful navigation and growing desperation. Tom had to pause every few meters to check for moonlight leaks, the twin moons' alignment creating unpredictable patterns of focused radiation. What should have been a 10-minute walk stretched into an hour of terrifying progress. Halfway to their destination, disaster struck. A support beam, weakened by years of neglect, chose that moment to shift under the stress of the lunar gravitational effects. The resulting collapse opened a direct line from the surface to the tunnel they were traversing. Concentrated moonlight poured through the opening like liquid silver, illuminating the passage with deadly beauty. Tom threw himself forward, trying to shield Kira with his own body, but it was too late. The light struck her full force, and her agonized scream echoed through the tunnels. But something impossible happened. Where the moonlight touched Tom's exposed skin, there was no burning, no pain. The radiation that was killing Kira seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. More than that, where his body blocked the light, from reaching her, her burns stopped spreading. "What?" Kira gasped, staring at him in shock. Tom looked down at his arms, bathed in the same moonlight that was destroying her. His human physiology was not just resistant to the radiation, it was somehow neutralizing it. Where the light passed through the air around his body, its deadly properties seemed to diminish. "I don't understand," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, his engineer's mind was working through the implications. Humans evolved under a specific type of solar radiation. Our cellular structure is designed to process certain wavelengths of light. Maybe... He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he wrapped himself around Kira as completely as possible, using his body as a living shield. The effect was immediate. Her screaming stopped, her breathing steadied, the spreading burns began to stabilize. "You're absorbing it," she whispered in wonder. "The moonlight that poisons me, your body is processing it normally." Tom felt a surge of understanding. Human bodies had evolved complex mechanisms for dealing with solar radiation. Melanin production, DNA repair systems, cellular defenses that had been refined over millions of years of evolution under Earth-specific stellar conditions. What was toxic to Kira's altered physiology was simply another form of energy to his, but the realization came with a terrible price. Maintaining this protective position meant Tom was absorbing massive amounts of concentrated radiation. While his body could process it, there were limits to human endurance. He could already feel the strain, fatigue, nausea, the early signs of radiation sickness. "Tom, you can't keep this up," Kira said, recognizing the symptoms. "You're killing yourself to save me." "I'm buying us time," he corrected, his voice tight with effort. "Time to think, to plan, to find a real solution." They remained locked together in the tunnel, Tom's body serving as a living filter between Kira and the deadly moonlight. Around them, the alignment continued to intensify, creating patterns of focused radiation that would have been beautiful if they weren't so lethal. But Tom's human ingenuity was already working on the problem. If his body could neutralize the toxic effects of moonlight, then perhaps he could replicate that process artificially. Human biochemistry wasn't magic. It was a collection of well-understood chemical reactions that could be analyzed, synthesized, and reproduced. "I need to get you to the fabrication lab," he said finally. "We can't stay here, and I can't keep this up indefinitely. But if I can synthesize the compounds my body uses to process radiation..." "The lab is on the surface level," Kira protested. "I'll never survive the exposure." Tom was quiet for a moment, calculating distances, radiation levels, and the rapidly diminishing time before the alignment reached its peak. The solution, when it came to him, was so elegantly human in its audacity that he almost laughed. Then, "We'll bring the lab to us," he said. Using his communicator, Tom began accessing the colony's automated systems. Emergency protocols existed for exactly this kind of situation, contamination events that required specialized equipment to be deployed to remote locations. As chief engineer, he had the authority to activate those protocols. Within minutes, maintenance drones were gathering components from the fabrication lab and transporting them to the tunnel system. It was a logistical nightmare that would have been impossible for most species, but humans had built their technology with modularity and adaptability in mind. As the first drone arrived with a portable molecular assembler, Tom felt the familiar pride of human achievement. Other species built for elegance or harmony or power, humans built for impossible situations like this one. "You're insane," Kira whispered, watching the drones work with mechanical precision. "I'm human," Tom replied. "Same difference." The assembler hummed to life, and Tom began the delicate process of synthesizing the biochemical compounds that would save both their lives. Outside, the twin moons continued their deadly dance, but inside the tunnel, human determination was building a shield against the darkness. The portable molecular assembler worked through the night, creating synthetic compounds based on Tom's own biochemical processes. Each batch required precise calibration. Too little, and the solution would be ineffective; too much, and it might prove toxic to Kira's already damaged system. Tom's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Despite his natural resistance, the prolonged exposure to concentrated moonlight was taking its toll. His hands shook as he input commands into the assembler, and his vision occasionally blurred with the effort of maintaining focus. "You need to rest," Kira said, her voice stronger now that she was protected from direct exposure. "Let me help." "You don't understand the equipment," Tom protested, but she was already studying the interface with the same analytical intensity he had seen in the greatest human engineers. "I built living cities," she reminded him. "My people may have used biological processes, but the underlying principles are the same. Pattern recognition, resource allocation, system optimization, these are universal concepts. Together, they work to refine the synthesis process." Kira's intuitive understanding of organic systems complemented Tom's mechanical expertise, creating a partnership that neither could have achieved alone. The solution they developed was unlike anything either of their species had created before, a hybrid of human biochemistry and Noxari architectural principles. But their work was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Multiple sets of boots moving with military precision through the tunnel system. The colony's security forces had finally traced the unauthorized equipment requisitions to their location. "Tom Jensen, this is Security Chief Marcus," a voice echoed through the tunnels. "You're in violation of 17 different safety protocols. Come out with your hands visible." Tom exchanged a look with Kira. Discovery meant separation, interrogation, and almost certainly her death. The security forces wouldn't understand the situation, wouldn't care about the scientific breakthrough they had achieved. They would see only a human engineer compromising colony safety for an illegal alien. "I need 5 more minutes," Tom called back, his fingers flying over the assembler controls. "The synthesis is almost complete." "You need to surrender now," Marcus replied. "We have authorization to use force if necessary." But Tom had spent his entire career working with security protocols. He knew exactly how long it would take them to breach the tunnel system safely, how many procedures they would have to follow before they could use weapons in the confined space. Human bureaucracy, usually an obstacle to progress, was now buying them precious time. The assembler chimed softly, indicating the latest batch was ready. Tom filled a medical injector with the synthetic compound, his hands steady despite the approaching danger. This was the culmination of everything he had learned about human ingenuity, the ability to innovate under pressure, to find solutions when failure meant death. "This is theoretical," he warned Kira as he prepared the injection. "I've synthesized the compounds, but I can't guarantee how your body will react." "I trust you," she said simply, and the faith in her voice nearly broke his resolve. The injection site was tender where the moonlight had burned her, but Kira didn't flinch as the needle penetrated her skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes widened as the synthetic compounds began to work their way through her system. "I can feel it," she whispered. "It's like having armor inside my cells." Tom helped her to her feet, just as the security forces rounded the final corner. They were greeted by the sight of a human engineer and an alien woman standing together in a makeshift laboratory, surrounded by equipment that should have been impossible to operate in such conditions. "Tom, what the hell have you done?" Marcus demanded, his weapon raised but not yet aimed. The security chief was a reasonable man, but this situation was beyond anything in his training. "I've prevented a diplomatic incident," Tom replied calmly, "and possibly made one of the most important scientific discoveries in human history." To demonstrate, he reached up and manually opened one of the tunnel access panels, allowing concentrated moonlight to pour into the space. Kira stepped directly into the beam, her skin glowing but not burning. The synthetic compounds were working, neutralizing the toxic radiation before it could trigger the cellular cascade that had plagued her people for generations. "Impossible," Marcus breathed, lowering his weapon. "Nothing's impossible," Tom said, and there was quiet pride in his voice. "You just have to be willing to break the rules to find the solution." The security team stood in stunned silence as Kira moved freely through the moonlight, her face turned upward toward the deadly radiance that had once been her prison. For the first time in years, she was truly free. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. The molecular assembler began to emit warning signals, its components failing under the stress of continuous operation. The synthetic compounds required constant production to maintain their effectiveness, and the portable equipment wasn't designed for long-term synthesis. "How long will the effects last?" Marcus asked, his security training overriding his amazement. Tom checked his calculations, cross-referencing metabolic rates with compound degradation. 12 hours, maybe less. We need to get her to the main fabrication facility to produce a permanent solution. "That's on the surface," Marcus pointed out. "Full moonlight exposure." Tom looked at Kira, standing in the silver beam with tears streaming down her face. After years of hiding in darkness, she was finally able to exist in the light. But unless they could scale up the synthesis process, this freedom would be temporary. "Then, we'd better move fast," he said, already planning their route through the colony. Humans have always been good at beating the clock. As they prepared to leave the tunnels, Tom felt the satisfaction that came with solving an impossible problem. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge would be convincing the colony administrators to support large-scale production of the synthetic compounds. Fortunately, Tom had learned something important during his weeks with Kira. Sometimes the most elegant solution required breaking all the rules. The journey to the surface became a desperate race against time. Tom could see the synthetic compounds beginning to fail as they climbed through the colony's levels. Kira's skin starting to show the telltale shimmer that preceded moonlight poisoning. The portable assembler's limited output couldn't keep pace with her body's consumption of the protective agents. "We're not going to make it," she said, pausing to lean against a corridor wall. The concentrated moonlight was growing stronger as they approached the surface levels, the twin moons reaching the peak of their alignment. But Tom was already working on an alternative solution. Throughout the colony, emergency lighting systems cast their own shadows, creating pockets of relative safety. If he could time their movements correctly, they could move between these zones while minimizing exposure. "Human emergency protocols," he explained to Marcus, who was coordinating their route. "We've always planned for worst-case scenarios." The security chief nodded grimly. His team had positioned themselves at key points along their path, ready to provide additional shielding if necessary. What had started as an arrest operation had transformed into a rescue mission, evidence of the human capacity for rapid adaptation in crisis situations. They reached the fabrication facility's outer door just as Kira collapsed. The synthetic compounds had depleted completely, leaving her vulnerable to the moonlight that streamed through the transparent aluminum windows. Tom threw himself over her, once again using his body as a shield, but the effort was taking its toll on his human physiology. "Tom, you can't," Marcus warned, recognizing the early signs of severe radiation exposure. "You're absorbing enough energy to power a small reactor." "Then we'd better finish this quickly," Tom gasped, his vision blurring from the strain. Inside the fabrication facility, the main molecular assembler was already warming up, its systems far more sophisticated than the portable unit they'd used in the tunnels. But configuring it for biochemical synthesis would require precise programming, work that demanded steady hands and clear thinking. Tom stumbled to the control console, his body shaking from radiation overload. The interface swam before his eyes, the familiar controls seeming suddenly foreign and incomprehensible. He had pushed human endurance beyond its limits, and his system was beginning to shut down. "Let me," Kira said, moving beside him despite the moonlight streaming through the Windows. You've shown me the principles, now trust me to apply them. Her fingers moved across the controls with surprising confidence, translating Tom's biochemical formulas into the assembler's programming language. She worked with the same intuitive grace that had once grown cities from living crystal, now applied to human technology. The protein synthesis cascade needs to be reversed, she murmured, making adjustments that Tom's failing vision couldn't track. And the cellular absorption rate should be logarithmic, not linear. Tom watched in amazement as she improved upon his original design, incorporating insights from Noxari biology that made the synthetic compounds more efficient and longer-lasting. What had been a temporary solution was becoming a permanent cure. Vantni, assembler hummed to life, producing compounds that glowed with an inner light. As the first batch completed, Kira administered the injection to herself, then turned to help Tom. His human physiology had protected her, but it had also absorbed damage that might prove fatal without treatment. "Your turn," she said, preparing a modified version of the compound designed for human biochemistry. "I don't need—" Tom began, then stopped as he saw his reflection in the console's surface. His skin was already showing signs of severe radiation, damage burns that would have killed a lesser species. The injection site tingled as the modified compounds entered his system. Within minutes, Tom felt his strength returning, his vision clearing. The synthetic agents were working to repair cellular damage faster than human biology could naturally manage. Around them, the moonlight storm reached its peak intensity. The twin moons hung directly overhead, their combined radiance turning the night into something resembling day. But inside the fabrication facility, two beings from different species stood together, protected by a solution that neither could have achieved alone. "It's working," Kira said, holding up her hand to let the moonlight play across her palm. "I can feel the compounds circulating, neutralizing the toxins before they can take hold." Tom nodded, checking the assembler's output. They now had enough synthetic compounds to treat dozens of Noxari, with the capacity to produce more as needed. The solution was scalable, reproducible, and based on principles that could be adapted for other species facing similar challenges. "You realize what this means," he said, looking at her with growing excitement. "We haven't just solved your problem, we've created a new field of xenobiochemistry.